Welcome to Unplanned Podnancy, the only podcast on the internet where feet smell like chicken and chickens are actually potatoes. Chris, how was your week?
Chickens are potatoes. Does that mean chicken nuggets are French fries?
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, you weren't ready for that one, were you?
No. Welcome to the world's most twisted McDonald's.
We serve fries, nuggets. You want your nugget meal or your fry meal? It's the same shit.
It's that same shit.
Accept it. How was my week? My week was both fantastic, uneventful, and stressful. I celebrated my dad's birthday with my sister, my mom, my dad, and my sister's boyfriend. He got a smoker, and he smoked some meats. I made some macaroni and cheese. We had, other smoked meat related side dishes. And, it was just a nice little gathering. So that was pleasant. That was on Sunday. Other than that, it was a pretty relaxing long weekend, which was nice. It was stressful in the fact that I keep thinking about work, which I don't love. You try to put that stuff out of your mind when you're not working. But beyond that, it's been a decent week. How about yourself?
It's fine. Speaking of not being able to put work out of your mind, that's an issue with working from home. Because I feel like it's easier when you work somewhere to just load up in your car after work and just be like, deuces, I'm out, and then just put it off until tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's way harder to do that when you work from home. That's one downside of working from home.
Well, when you're working from home, for me, the place where I play video games is the place where I work.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
I don't love that.
Yeah.
But my week, though, was fine. This weekend, I went to my mom's house for 4th of July, and I saw my aunts and my uncles on my mom's side. We ate some pizza, we played some card games, played some dominoes, and it was fun. I watched some racing with my mom, drank some beer with my mom, watched some Netflix with my mom, and then I came back, and yesterday was Tuesday. What did I do yesterday? Yesterday, I worked, and then I watched more Netflix with my girlfriend. So
yeah.
I've watched a lot of Netflix.
What are you guys watching on Netflix?
Travels with My Father. I don't know if you know who Jack Whitehall is. He's a comedian. He's a British comedian. In the show, because it's a few years old, he's 28, and his dad is 78 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he convinces his dad to go on a 5-week trip with him to Southeast Asia. And his dad's a really old, stuck-up, grumpy, conservative British guy. And it's just funny. It's just funny to watch him be real unamused by not having his creature comforts.
Yeah.
And being real intolerant of other people's way of life.
Right on.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah, I don't know who Jack Whitehall is. I'll have to look him up and check it out. I have an idea, but I might not be right, so I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah, you should check it out. But speaking of 4th of July, we took last week off of the podcast, and so you got a 4-minute mini-sode instead of an episode last week. But we're back this week with a full-length episode. If you watched the last Podnancy Plays that came out the week before last, I subjected Chris to some games that I used to play in my childhood, and we figured out that the games weren't as good as I remember them being, because I was seeing through nostalgia-tinted glasses. And Chris, if I'm not wrong, that has something to do with our topic for the day.
Yeah, we're going to talk about how the past just seems better than the present. And through the lens of nostalgia, movies, video games, just life in general often seems better in the good old days, as they call it, right? So that's where that phrase probably originates. I'm not going to say
America was great.
Back when America was great. Make America great again. Yeah. Back in the... I remember. Yeah, member berries. I mean, a lot of things stem from the idea of the past being better. So through the lens of nostalgia, why does everything in the past seem better? and are things in the past really better? So that's where I want to jump in.
Okay, I think there's a couple things that play into it. The first thing is when you look back on stuff that you enjoy, like games and movies and stuff, you tend not to remember things that are mediocre.
Yeah.
Right? You can remember things that are notably terrible, and you can also are likely to remember things that you really enjoyed doing. So when you look back on stuff, like I said, you tend not to remember the mediocrity, and you remember the things that you enjoyed more. So when you think about a moment in time, or you think about doing something, you have like this quick slideshow of fun memories of something that you can play back really quickly. So I think the issue when you get into like playing the games that we played in the last Podnancy plays is there was a lot of monotony in those games, and so like your brain filters that out and just plays you like a highlight reel of the good parts of something, so it seems better than it actually was.
See,
that's
interesting, because when I think of something nostalgia tinted, for me a big one's World of Warcraft, right?
Yeah.
I remember, or at least I think I remember, the amount of like time you have to put into World of Warcraft when you're like leveling, and it takes like 20 days or 10 days or whatever to level a character from like 1 to 60 in like vanilla or classic. I don't specifically know in classic, but like I say that I remember that, right? You know, I'm like, oh yeah, it took forever. I spent like a week going from 59 to 60, blah blah blah. But when I say I know that, but when I think back on it, I'm so like, oh, it was better. It was a better time, despite knowing how shitty taking that long to level is. Do you think that in terms of the past and achievement, you know, when you're accomplishing something and something that you already have accomplished, do you think that the difficulty of something and getting through it also tint something in a more positive light than the present because you know that you accomplished something?
Yeah, I can see that. Like the first time you accomplish something, it does feel good. Like you feel like you finally achieved this thing, and so maybe you fondly remember like the endorphin rush that you got from finally accomplishing that. I think, like I said, the thing that I said could apply to that too is like you remember this highlight reel of leveling up, and so it seems better than it is. But then when I think about World of Warcraft specifically, or even just RPGs that I really liked, not even necessarily when I was a kid, but just when I think back on them, I enjoyed them more the first time because what was actually fun was the unknown and like experiencing new things. Because like when you play World of Warcraft for the first time, you load in and you don't know everything. You haven't seen everything. It seems like a mystery. And so as you play, you're constantly experiencing new stuff. So the allure and the experience of something new helps. Like it was better when you played it the first time because it was new. But then I think with World of Warcraft, the thing is with the mystery, another side of that is when you're playing it for the first time, it seems better than it actually is. It's not even that you had more fun the first time necessarily. It's just that you think you're gonna have more fun the first time than you actually end up having. Because if you don't know how something's gonna play out and you don't know everything there is to know about something, the joy and the excitement comes from what could be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you're always wondering what's around the next corner. And so the excitement is in the anticipation. And what you actually end up experiencing, or what is actually there to experience, may be a disappointment, but it was the experience of wondering that was actually exciting.
See, that's interesting to me, and I don't want to get stuck on World of Warcraft too long. But when we're talking about World of Warcraft and we're saying, you know, there's a nostalgia for the past, and World of Warcraft still comes out with new expansions.
Right.
But I think a lot of people would say the new expansions aren't as good as the old stuff, which is why there is the classic servers. But when you load into a new expansion, there is that mystery. You don't know what the continent is going to look like, or what the zones are going to be, or what the storylines are going to be, the quest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why does that sense of mystery not hold up after you've already played so many expansions?
Well, and I would, based on like the people in our audience that I know listen, I think that most people listening probably know what World of Warcraft is, but brief explanation. If somehow you've been living under a rock for the last 20 years and you don't know what World of Warcraft is.
15, yeah.
Warcraft. Oh, 17?
2004,
no,
I think, right?
2004,
16, 17, 18?
18.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, if you've been living under a rock for the last 18 years, World of Warcraft is a massively multiplayer online RPG, which just means it's a place where a bunch of nerds go log online. You roleplay a fantasy character in a medieval fantasy land. You do quests, you turn them in, you get money, you get experience, your character levels up, you get more shit to put on your character. You meet a bunch of people, you form a guild, you get mad at those people, and then you quit. Yeah, periodically there's a new expansion to World of Warcraft which comes out and adds more content to the game. But to your point about the expansions, why is the expansion not as exciting as the original content was? For one thing, I mean, my personal opinion is that the content that Blizzard puts out now isn't as polished, and it isn't as good as the original content was. Another part of it, I think, is even though it's new content, it still typically follows a formula.
Sure.
They're hindered somewhat by they have to kind of play it safe because they have a specific audience that they want to sell the game to, and if it's too different than the base game, then they may lose that core audience. So they sort of have to stick to a formula in that regard. Plus, it's the same game, so you're limited by what the game can do.
Yeah.
So,
sure,
it may be new content in the sense that it's new enemies, new dungeons, new gear, whatever. But really, it's just the same concepts, just played out in a different way. So it's not as interesting as it was.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, like you said, it's you have to stick with that core concept, right? And once you understand that core concept, there's only so much new stuff, or even no new stuff to discover, and you're carrying that core concept along through different backgrounds. Yeah. The class may get a new spell or two, but
right.
It's still going to play fundamentally the same.
And I think that concept holds true to not just games or World of Warcraft in general, but like life in general, because things are patterns, right? And as you get older and you have more experiences, your brain works in a way where it sees things, your brain filters things through your previous experiences. So the more previous experiences you have, the less novel new experiences are, because it's more likely that you've done something that may not be exactly the same, but is close to what you're doing now in a way. So like the first time you watch a TV show that you really like, if you've never seen anything like it before, like let's say the first time you watch anime, maybe you watch Dragon Ball or something, and you really like it. You've never watched any anime before, and it's just the greatest thing ever, which Dragon Ball is pretty good. But then if you go find another anime and you watch it, it may be totally different in concept, but it's going to be slightly less interesting to you because now you've already seen an anime. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You may watch Dragon Ball and enjoy it a lot, and it's really exciting because it's an anime, and then go watch Death Note, which is completely different. But now, instead of experiencing anime and getting to experience the story of Death Note at the same time, now you're really just experiencing Death Note for the first time and not two things at once. So it's a little bit less exciting. Whereas if you flipped it around the other way and watched Death Note as your first anime, it would probably seem more exciting than it would have if you had done it the other way around.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess the concept of pattern recognition, and yeah, it kind of detracts from the dopamine hit right. Potentially, because when you're exposed to something new, you're like you get that shock factor. It's like watching right. a magician do a trick you've never seen, and then once you've seen one trick, if you see a trick that is similar, you're not as impressed. You may not know how it works still, but once you've seen a rabbit vanish, you care less about a rose vanishing or what any other object until you see a different type of trick, and you're like, oh shit, that lady is floating in the air. And then every time after that you see a lady float or any object float, it's a little less special. So that makes sense to me. What about in the sense of life in general? Does this sort of pattern recognition hold up in just life experiences? Because I think a lot of people, and not everyone, this applies to a specific, maybe not a specific set, but a subset of people that their earlier life was better than their current life. Some people say that they reached their peak in high school, like that high school was the best times of their life. Some people, it's their 20s, other people it's their 30s. But generally, people can point to a time in their life that they think was better, whether it's a full year or decade as people get older. But do these pattern recognition things play into just life in general as well?
I mean, yeah, I think so. I think a lot of that is to do with what I was talking about earlier with mystery and not knowing what's around the corner. Because different people have different times in their life where they get to the point where they've decided that they're just going to settle down, or that they're done with like going out and adventuring or taking risks or something like that. And that time falls at a different time in a lot of people's lives. But I would wager to guess, and I wouldn't know this without talking to different people who would say this, but I would say that the people who say that, like, well, high school or college was the best time of my life, those are people who, when they were that age, they were adventurous, they were getting out and they were exploring a lot of new things, and they were sort of engrossed in the mystery and the allure of, like, experiencing life and wondering what's going to come next and being excited to be out doing things and having those new experiences. And then at some point maybe in their 20s, they got married and they had kids and they just kind of settled down and then just like got comfortable in the mundane or the everyday life or whatever. And so they look back on that period of time where they didn't know what was going to happen as more exciting.
If that's the case, then why is it when people are faced with new experiences in their modern day lives, they don't always feel excited about it, but rather they feel annoyed?
Well,
for example, music. Music is a great example of something that, when you think about it with pattern recognition and these type of things, once you've been exposed to rock music, or for example, once you've heard one rock song, you should start, you would gradually pick up the pattern of how rock music works. And if you listen to just rock for a period of time, and then you start to develop this nostalgia for what classical rock sounded like, you're in your 50s, and then you get exposed to EDM.
Yeah.
Through this process of pattern recognition that we've been talking about, shouldn't EDM suddenly be exciting? Shouldn't it be a whole new thing to be like, whoa? But some people are immediately turned off by how different it is.
Well, some people do maintain that like sort of like childlike wonder even into their old age and still experience new things and are still excited by new things. My dad for sure was that way. Like, he was 73 years old and he still liked doing new stuff, seeing new things, new technology, new music, whatever. Like, probably just as much as he was when he was in his 20s. My dad wasn't one of those people who would have said that life was better in his 20s. In fact, he told me that his life was miserable when he was a young adult and that it only got better as he got older. And it only started going downhill when his body started failing him.
Sure.
Like, that's the kind of person my dad was. So not everybody is that way. I think maybe a couple things happen is like, one, I think a lot of those people have made a lot of the people who don't enjoy new experiences or are nostalgic about the 80s or the 70s or whatever, and they don't like hip-hop or EDM or whatever. I think those people have made some sort of subconscious decision somewhere along the way that they're not going to be open to new things anymore. Like, they take in what they want to take in, and then at some point and I don't know why that happens or where that happens. They just decide that for some reason they subconsciously shut that off. I think that's part of it. I think there's another part of it though, that like science has shown that when you're younger, your brain is still developing and you're still like forming new neural pathways and shit. So, and then you do that until you're like your late 20s, and then after that your brain kind of stops developing. So at that point it's probably not as easy to experience new things or understand things that are foreign to you. And so people who are resistant to that effort after that point probably lose that excitement.
When people, when you're forming those new neural pathways and then it stops, right? In your late 20s, as you said, does cynicism play into this in a similar way? Are cynicism and nostalgia two sides of the same coin? Becoming cynical about new things and reminiscing on old things, or these two separate topics that don't really feed into each other?
Are cynicism and nostalgia two sides of the same coin? As in, like, if you're likely to look back on the past as better, are you more likely to see new things as shitty?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that could, there's something to be said for that. I mean, if you look at the way that the Trump presidency marketed its entire agenda, it was the new progressive movements are bad and they're trying to destroy America's fundamentals and stuff. But so it's cynicism and resistance to new things. But then the way they marketed it was with nostalgia. Like the entire slogan, "Make America Great Again." Yeah. And it wasn't even specific. It didn't claim any point in time. And that's why it works so well, because anybody who had a point in time in the past where they thought that things were better could just apply that slogan to whatever preconceived notion they have about the past and at what point in time things were better.
Yeah, so that's a great example. That's a psychological warfare being utilized through a campaign slogan for nostalgia. I think you're absolutely right that entire campaign slogan needs nostalgia to exist.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you're cynical about the future, like you said, two sides of the same coin. If you're trying to resist new ideas or fight against new ideas or something, I think you have to have nostalgia. Otherwise, it doesn't work, because there has to be something good in the past worth holding on to if you're going to act that way, I guess. Or you at least have to perceive that there's something in the past good worth holding on to.
It's absolutely fascinating to me. And see, my mind starts to go to if people live too good of a moment in time. Well, let's use the high school example. If you're king of the court and you're your prom king, quarterback, whatever, you've got you've reached like these really high standards among your peer group, and then you go forward in life and you're run of the mill. Let's say you do fine by yourself. You're not you're not like scraping by or anything. You're just another worker. You're another cog in the machine. You're paying your bills, whatever. Does reaching too much of a height and having too good of a period of time cause a nostalgic lens as well, and maybe lead to that cynicism?
I think everybody is going to have their peak at somewhere. Like, nostalgia-tinted glasses or not, there's gonna, in a lot of cases, there is some reality to that. Some people's life really is the best it's ever gonna be in high school because they're good at sports, and that's okay. So this might be offensive to somebody, but like, some people may be really good at sports, and they're really good in their hometown or their county or their region or wherever they're at, and then that's what they focus on. And they don't spend the time to develop other interests or skills or anything like that. And then they find out after the fact that they were good, they were a big fish in a little pond, but they weren't good enough to make anything out of that later. And then if they can't pivot and figure something else out, then that may just be the best it's going to be for that person. And that happens 100%. So I think in a situation like that, nostalgia and cynicism might happen as an attempt to take the blame off of themselves to compensate for it a little bit. Because if you do that and then you find out that you weren't good enough and that you can't make anything out of your life after that, then the natural thing is to just say, well, things were better back then.
Yeah.
And it's the world that's wrong now and not me. And so that maybe that sounds shitty, but that for some people out there, that's the reality. And I think that's exactly where some of that comes from for some people, is just a resistance to put the blame on themselves for how things turned out, rather than like cynicism for the new, in that the new world changed and it's the world's fault that it changed and not their inability to adapt to it. And nostalgia in the sense that things were better back then and that's why my life was better, and it's not my fault that it's not as good now. So
yeah, it's heavy to think about the fact that some people, and I mean most people, are gonna have a peak. Hopefully your peak comes later in your life. Well, like with your dad, his peak ended when his body started to fail, which seems like how you want most people's lives to be, right? That way you have that enjoyment. That way you have that fulfillment every day going forward, discovering new things. It is sad to think about the fact that any one of us can hit that peak at any time and not know it until years down the road. That's awful to think about.
And you can look at that two ways. You can say, well, maybe this is the best it's going to be. Maybe this could be the best it's ever going to be. Or that could be later. It could be now.
It could be now. Oh, my God.
But, I think everybody has a peak. Like, if you're a rock star, your peak happens at some point in the middle of your life, probably. And when your songwriting ability and what you're putting out gels with what people want to hear. If you're a movie star, your peak of your life is going to be when you got deals for movies that worked for you and those movies were hits, or a director, or if you're a researcher and you go to school and get a PhD. The peak of your life may be at some point where like you have some major research breakthrough. It happens to everybody, and your path through life determines where that peak is. It's your attitude looking back on it, I think, that determines how you feel about it. Because you can, like I said, look back on it and blame the world for changing, or you can just look back on it and accept that the circumstances were such that things were better now and maybe they're not as good, or things were better then and maybe they're not as good now, and that just is what it is.
So is it possible to be nostalgic for a period of time and not be cynical about the future? I think I personally think yes, you can be nostalgic for a period of time and still think that a better period lays ahead. Do you think that's possible? Do you think it's possible to hit a peak and then hit a new peak?
Yeah, for sure. Like when I look back on the 90s or like the early 2000s when I was a kid, like a lot of that is what I was saying, where it's nostalgia because things were exciting, because I was a stupid kid and I didn't know any better, and like the world was my oyster and I was just learning new shit all the time. And like when you're a kid, that's exciting. But like the things that came from the 90s and the early 2000s, I still think are really cool. I think like that period of the like beginning of the widespread adoption of the internet is just a really cool point in history and stuff. So I absolutely have nostalgia for that period of time, but I still think that it's possible that cooler shit could happen. Like maybe 15 years from now, there's going to be some sort of crazy breakthrough and we're going to discover some sort of new technology that's going to bring about like some sort of new form of industrial revolution where we're going to like have interplanetary travel or some shit. I don't know. Nobody knows. Or we could have nuclear wasteland. That could happen too.
That's possible. That's absolutely possible. Has any piece of technology excited you as much as the internet did when you first discovered it? And I'm assuming that the internet excited you as a youth, and the sudden access to everything.
Yeah, I mean, so things that excite me as much as the prospect of the internet excited me when I was a kid and started using the internet. Maybe smartphones. Like maybe. But that was just taking all that and just sticking it in your hand. I think the idea of VR is really cool. I don't think it's been well executed over the last few years. I think there's potential there for something that's really, really cool. I just don't think it's been embraced as much as it could have been. Or, like, I don't think it's been done as well as it could be either.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think on the topic of VR, I think there's a big untapped market still. I think the accessibility is just still not there. I know that PlayStation tried, but I still think it was just too expensive and there was just too much setup. I think for VR to become truly accessible, right, it has to be as easy as plugging in your game console and then throwing on like a visor, and then that's it, and then you're in. For me, in terms of being nostalgic about technology, I think gaining access to the internet was definitely like one of the really big highlights of my life experience in terms of technology and like computers in general. I don't know that any technology has really excited me as much since. When I think about it, except for maybe like 3D printing, I still find the concept of being able to just print objects extremely cool. And as the technology for that advances and gets more powerful and more sophisticated, they're beginning to print organs and stuff and living matter. I think that is one of the most exciting technologies around. It's not something I have access to. I don't have a 3D printer, unfortunately. It's something I would like to have, but I don't know that it's going to become as widespread as like the internet is. I don't know that everyone is going to have a 3D printer. Maybe one day. Maybe we'll all be in Star Trek and we'll have a machine that can just make us anything, food, clothes, whatever.
I mean, there was a point in like the mid 2000s where every single person had a printer, like a USB printer.
That's true.
And that was crazy for a little while. I mean, that you could just print out a piece of paper and use it for something. Now nobody cares about printers. I don't even have a printer. Actually, I do, but it's not hooked up, and I don't even think it has any ink because now you can just email a PDF to somebody. And they can open it on their phone or whatever. But yeah, we may reach a point where a PDF or a 3D printer becomes like a normal household appliance.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool. I definitely think if we reach the Star Trek equivalent where it's just a synthesizer and it's just like, you can have whatever you want, boop, that would be pretty dope. Maybe one day down the line, that's a whole different thing, just being able to convert energy to matter, but maybe we'll get there. 3D printers are a technology that I'm definitely excited about, and VR was too. I remember when the Kinect for the Xbox came out, I was really excited about that. I was like, oh, this is gonna be cool.
Oh yeah,
being able to like move and be in the video games, and then it sucked ass. Yeah.
Well, PlayStation did that first with the iToy.
That's true.
I don't know if you remember that.
I do. Yeah.
They had this little ninja game that you could like punch the ninjas as they were flying at you. And the Wii. Remember when the Wii came out and everybody lost their fucking minds for like 2 years?
Yeah, being able to move.
And everything became a Wii game.
Remotes and be like, yeah, it's moving on screen, baby. Yeah.
Yeah. And then everybody was like, this fucking sucks. When I play video games, I want to sit down on my ass on the couch. Play video games. That was the issue. The issue with the Wii was it took normal video games and made them harder for no benefit.
Yep. It didn't really give you a sense of immersion.
No. No, it just made the controls more clunky.
Yes. 100%. Yes. The only Wii game that I can think of that I really enjoyed, and I'm going to get the name wrong. Was Zenkaichi 3 for Dragon Ball Z. It's not necessarily a great game, but it has fun Wii controls and the fact that like you're doing like the Kamehameha motion and like you're doing like the spread arm like charging stance, and like when you do like energy clashes, you're shaking that Wiimote, and whoever shakes that Wiimote faster wins that clash. I enjoyed playing that, and we used to get sweaty playing that game, just clashing beams and shaking the fuck out of controllers and stuff. So I think that was a good implementation of it. I can't think of another Wii game that I really enjoyed the Wii controls, because all the Mario games I hated the Wiimote and moving like the star around for Mario Galaxy. Yeah. It was awful.
Yeah,
it was awful.
That's an interesting type of nostalgia. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where like people will sit around and they'll be nostalgic about a period in time where they will admit that it's worse.
Huh.
Like, like, have you ever encountered a group of dudes who are just sitting there and like, yeah, things were shitty back when you had to fucking plug in your phone into your computer so that you could dial up to the internet and somebody could call your house and kick you off the computer.
But they're talking about it still.
Yeah, but they're talking about it. Yeah, they're reminiscing about it fondly, even though they admit that it's worse. They're enjoying the fact that they're enjoying the experience of remembering when things were worse.
Yeah,
that's an interesting type of nostalgia.
Yeah, is that nostalgia?
Yeah.
I guess so. I guess if you're looking back on anything fondly, whether you know it's better or worse, it's still nostalgia. That's actually a really good point, because there definitely is that looking back and being like, that fucking sucked. I loved it. That's a real thing. Yeah. That's definitely a real thing.
I do that too.
Oh yeah.
Like when I'm telling stories with my friends about how drunk and miserable I was that one time, even though we're just like, man, that was a crazy night. I think that's an evolutionary thing. It's like a bonding mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Bonding through pain is definitely a real thing. Yeah. Absolutely, because I would say I look back on our time working at the college with nostalgia. But that was not.
If somebody woke me up tomorrow morning and they were like, "You work here again?" I'd be like, "No!"
Yeah, that was not a good time. That job was not good. But I am nostalgic for that period, and I think a big part of that is the relationships that are formed through that pain, through that misery, because misery loves company, and being able to relate to someone that is suffering through that same thing. The moments that occur because of what you're going through are also part of that bonding experience. I don't know that I've ever laughed harder than when we were sitting in the office trying not to laugh and sending gifs on Discord in front of our boss.
Maybe there was some times when I was a teenager when, like, in similar situations where I just like cut up with my friends and stuff in class where we would regularly laugh that much. But aside from that, that's definitely the most regularly I've just laughed and like cut up with somebody in my life.
Yeah, it almost felt a little bit like school in that way.
Yeah, it kind of did. It was a lot like high school.
Yeah.
In the sense that, like, you don't want to be there. You're just trying to do anything that you can to keep your mind off of the misery. And I want to be clear, if somebody who knows what we're talking about ever listens to this, I appreciated that job.
Yes.
It actually, like, it was a good point in my career. Yep. I don't regret doing it.
No.
But if you were there, hey, what's up? I don't have any ill will towards any of those people, but we all know we were overworked, and it was
overworked, underpaid, and it was stressful.
Yeah, and anybody who worked there and knows what we're talking about can admit that.
Yeah.
It was stressful.
I'll echo that sentiment just to put it out there that it was good for the career. It was a stepping stone, but it did suck.
It was trial by fire.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, man. Nostalgia through pain. That's a real thing. Nostalgia for shitty stuff is definitely a thing. Is there another type of nostalgia other than things that people really enjoyed and things that really sucked?
Things that people really enjoyed and things that people...
I mean, that's the extremes, right?
Yeah.
Which is what we were talking about in the beginning. That's what you brought up, is that the extremes form those memories, and that's what you become nostalgic about.
Yeah. I don't know. I think people can be nostalgic just for a point in time for no reason, too, about things that are just inconsequential. Like, I'll hear my mom talk to her sisters about just, like, the wallpaper on their mom's bedroom or something like that, or just random shit from the 70s or the 60s, and it's not even anything particularly good or bad. They're just reminiscing about it. And I think that's nostalgia. But I think that's like what I was saying with, I think it's an evolutionary thing. It's like a bonding mechanism, right? Like if you have a shared experience with someone, then it feels good to talk about it and like experience that or remember it together. It's just a tribal thing, right?
Yeah. I think so. I think you're right. I think it's an evolutionary thing. It's a tribal thing. It's a bonding mechanism to make people stick together.
Yeah, and it's we've talked about this before on a previous episode, I'm sure. But like when we were evolving, it was beneficial to your survival to stay with your group of people and like blend in with the crowd and stuff. And so reminiscing about shit and being nostalgic about shared experiences is a mechanism, like you were saying, to make sure that people stay in their community. Like, whether things are better or not, it's probably actually beneficial to your survival if you look back on shared experiences with your tribe as good, even whether they were or not. Just because it's a motivating factor to keep you together.
Interesting.
And ensure long-term survival.
Nostalgia could be a survival mechanism.
I think that's probably the most likely explanation.
I mean, most things do stem from evolution, right? And the need to survive. So, yeah. I mean, because if you, I guess when I think about it through that lens, if you make it to adulthood as an ancient person and you've survived, well, that means that the land that you grew up in is safe and fertile, so you should want to be there. So you should be nostalgic for it. So maybe that's where it all lies. It's beneficial to
you to like block out the mundane and the shitty, because like you said, as long as you survived it, then it probably wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
So
is it just all monkey brain? Is that what we're winding it down to? Is nostalgia just monkey brain being like, this was good, stick with it?
I think there's a lot to be said for that, and I think that's probably most of it. Yeah, if I'm being real.
Yeah, and here we are once again on Unplanned Podnancy, where we go. Maybe science can explain this. Maybe it's science. It's just evolution, baby. It's just science.
It's math related to science.
Taylor Swift. Oh God.
No, that's Katy Perry.
No, it's Katy Perry.
Yeah.
With Neil deGrasse Tyson. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Katie.
Katie.
I apologize to Taylor.
Sorry, Tay.
Sorry, Tay. Miss Swift. Well, I think on that note, we should wind down this episode of Unplanned Podnancy, and I would like to thank everyone for watching. And if you've made it this far, if you would like to, go check out Podnancy Plays on YouTube. It's our show after the show, where you will hear us for this episode recapping about nostalgia and maybe playing something nostalgic. So go check that out. Check out unplannedpodnancy.com. Matt, what can they find over there on unplannedpodnancy.com?
If you go to unplannedpodnancy.com, you can find our merch store. You can buy something on the merch store. You can buy a bucket or a basket mug. You can buy an Unplanned Podnancy t-shirt. You can buy a I'm Podnant t-shirt. Any of the money that we make from the I'm Podnant t-shirt is going to get donated to Planned Parenthood. And you can also find links to all of our social media pages. And you can find a link to the Podnancy Plays YouTube page there as well. I hope your monkey brain enjoyed this episode.
I hope you become nostalgic for our voices.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.